speak more about the importance of relationships between students and teachers, and what does that really mean, a healthy, appropriate relationship?
So relationships, we often talk about the negotiation of a relationship, and I believe all relationships are to be negotiated. There's a purpose to the relationship, and there's some ownership for everybody's part in the relationship. At our school, we really talk about students' ownership in the relationship is learning to the best of their ability, and teachers' ownerships in the relationship is teaching to the best of their ability. And we actually have discussions over where does conflict come into play given those two goals. And then we talk specifically about if those are our goals and our obligation and responsibilities in the relationship, then how do we go forward and negotiate the relationship? And that really gives that relationship. It's not about a positive relationship for the sake of a positive relationship. It is a positive relationship for the sake of maximizing student progress and learning and growth.
And so what does that look like sometimes?
We're really talking about what are those things that a student can achieve and how do we support them in achieving those expectations if they were to use their full potential. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we need to, not every student comes to school ready to use their full potential. And that's sort of sometimes the difficulty in that relationship is oftentimes we start out with a belief about student strength that the student themselves haven't quite grasped yet. So we believe their potential more than they might believe their own potential. And that's really where it's important to have a solid foundation of a relationship, because you're going to use that solid foundation in relationship to promote that growth. They're going to say, I trust you, so I'm going to let you extend my ability, even if I don't have the confidence right now to be assured it's going to be a success for me. My trust in you will allow you to extend my ability, extend my discomfort, take a risk and a chance because I know you're there to support me and you have my best interest at heart.
One of the things that we hear from teachers and from school administrators, one of the challenges of using a strength-based approach sometimes is when you're dealing with difficult situations with students or challenges in the classroom or conflicts between teachers and students. How do you go about creating an environment that is strength-based that really deals with those kind of concerns in a constructive way?
The last issue that we generally deal with as far as under this model would be discipline, and it's generally in most schools the one that consumes the most time. But oftentimes students are misdirected. They're actually social emotional issues, mental health issues, or cognitive issues that are defined as behavioral issues. We even actually define behavioral issues in two different categories. We talk about performance deficits and skills deficits. So a skill deficit in a behavioral issue is I didn't have the skill to do what you were asking me to do, or I didn't actually know the expectation of what you were asking me to do, so I couldn't really conform to that expectation. So the result of that is we ask teachers to explain what the expectation was. Make sure that students have the ability and the capacity to follow through with that expectation, and then give them multiple attempts with support in following through. The only issue that should be of a disciplinary nature that we have in our building around class exclusion is a behavioral deficit, a behavioral issue that's a performance deficit. So it means that I had the skills to do what you're asking me to do. I knew what the expectation was. I just decided not to do it anyway. And so those are legitimate referrals to the office, but we really make our teachers be very specific around recognizing is that what's going on in your classroom, and then that's the appropriate direction for that to be supported.
So you're asking teachers to really consider, in whatever kind of barriers that I'm experiencing with a student, whether it be academic or behavioral, that they're processing, is this something that's a potential mental health issue, a social, kind of issue? Is it a cognitive issue, or is it a behavioral issue? And if it's a behavioral issue, to differentiate between what is a skill deficit versus what a performance deficit. Yeah.
And you'll recognize if teachers go through that process ongoingly, they become more familiar in identifying those circumstances early on. So they actually reduce the anxiety for students around whether my need's going to get supported or not. And what tends to happen now, the student relaxes because they do get more support around their need, and then we actually, or the barrier actually is evident less, because it's less of a concern, because the student now fully engages in that classroom environment, takes some risks around that, and knows the support is going to be available to them should they hit the barrier. So all of those other behaviors that students often put in place to avoid a task that they think they're going to be unsuccessful at, they're now willing to more engage in that. The other thing, it identifies for teachers that they need to support students in multiple ways and be responsible for that.
So, you know, if teachers do recognize that some of these other things might be at play, then that's when those, connecting them to those supports that you talked about would be the way to go for them.
Exactly, and what you end up finding actually is you start to look at misbehavior less as something that's getting in the way and more as an opportunity to know more about the student, because once you figure that out, that's where you're going to get the most progress past where you're at. So our students, or our teachers now, don't necessarily look at some issues in their classroom necessarily as something that's gone wrong or something that's bad. They look at it more as this obstacle or this barrier that we're currently dealing with. When we resolve it, when we support it, when we figure it out and move beyond this, is our next biggest area of growth for this individual.
Yeah, that's truly a strength-based approach. Yeah.